This video is indeed rated B for you'd better back on out of here if you don't want spoilers, buddy. The ending of patch 7.3 for Dawntrail provided quite a few questions when it comes to the Ascians and what they're still doing. With the destruction of Zodiark and the final days averted, you'd think most of the remaining Ascians would have simply given up and chosen to live new lives. In a perfect world, maybe they would have used their powers to improve the star as it is now, instead of trying to force it into becoming something different. After all, before the final days destroyed their civilization, the ancients believed enriching the world and uplifting each other was the highest calling one could have. Maybe Halmarut would have taken up gardening, just because. During the final cutscene of 7.3, Calyx was approached by someone in Ascian robes. It was Calyx who refers to them as our Winterer peers, and there's a couple of details in this sentence to make note of. By referring to them with plurals, we know that Calyx and this would-be Ascian aren't acting alone. Only time will tell how many people are in this group of theirs. But the fact that Winterer is capitalized asserts that this is a proper noun. So, we have a name for our little group of ne'er-do-wells. Who are these Winterers and what do they want? It's difficult to tell, but with Calyx trying everything in his power to regain the key, it's safe to assume that it wasn't just him that desired it. It's possible the entire Winterer group likely wished for this crystal to fall back into their possession. But who could this Ascian be? And exactly how many Ascians remain after the events of Endwalker? Well, let's recap all the Ascians we've met so far, the expansions they perished in, and narrow down the list. But we need to ask ourselves, what makes an Ascian hard to kill and why is it important to point out how they end? Because Ascians are more than just physical beings. Through unique rituals, they've become more akin to spirits or ghosts, which is why they often need to possess a body in order to interact with the world normally. Unless you have a special way of slaying a spirit or binding all of their ether into one place, it's very difficult to kill an Ascian. In fact, if you don't use any of these methods, you've only weakened them, and they are free to retreat and regain their power somewhere else. But with that out of the way, let's begin. Starting with the Realm Reborn, the first of the 13 Ascians to perish on screen was Nabrialis. Sure, the Warrior of Light defeated La Habrea earlier, but this wasn't a permanent death, as the soul of La Habrea had escaped to cause trouble at a later date. But after Nabrialis failed to both steal Tup Samadhi and kill the Warrior of Light, his essence was bound by white Auracite, ensuring that his soul couldn't escape. The reason white Auracite is so potent against entities like Ascians is due to their ether-absorbing properties. White Auracite in particular does a great job at taking in and containing large quantities of ether, making them a near-perfect counter to the Ascians, who are more spiritual than physical now. But with his entire being bound to a single location, Mumbrita sacrificed herself to ensure the Warrior of Light had enough ether to deal a fatal blow, granting Nabrialis a real death, and becoming the first Ascian the Warrior of Light truly defeats. Next is an Ascian most players haven't heard of, Emeroloth. This is the first Ascian to perish off screen, and the one who killed her was Kryle's adopted grandfather, Galuf Baldessian. You see, Galuf had dedicated a chunk of his life to containing and hopefully slaying an Elder Primal known as Eureka. But Emeroloth had discovered what Galuf was hiding upon the Isle of Vol, and planned on stealing Eureka for the Ascians to use in their twisted schemes. Galuf was prepared to sacrifice everything to prevent that from happening, using incredible magic powers to teleport the entire Isle of Vol into the ethereal realm. With Emeroloth trapped alongside them, Galuf and his allies battled and defeated her, and since they were already inside the star's lifestream, her soul couldn't escape. Instead of getting away, her essence was added to the flood of ether at the star's core. I understand there's a bit of contention surrounding her fate since earlier cutscenes in A Realm Reborn suggest that she didn't die, but this is more than likely a continuity error on the developer's end. Either the writers hadn't decided that was her true fate and would only flesh it out at a later time, or the person who made this cutscene simply did an oopsie. Either way, Galif's last will and testament states that Emerololth was scattered against the lifestream, never to return. And since nothing has happened to contradict his lore, it's likely that this is the more accurate source. Next, we move on to Heavensward. The finale of the base expansion actually results in 2 Ascian defeats at the same time. First, Eorzea is bound by White Auracite and then overwhelmed by the magic power from Nidhogg's Eye, granting her a real death just like Nabrialis before her. Shortly after, Lahabrea was actually defeated by the primal summoning of King Thordan. Not only does the primal deal a fatal blow to the Ascian, but his nature as a primal causes him to passively absorb and drain all the local ether around him. And seeing as Lahabrea was more than a spirit than material, King Thordan absorbs the Ascian and disperses his essence, granting Lahabrea his true end and becoming the first of the unsundered Ascians to perish. As far as we know, no Ascians perished during the events of Stormblood. Sure, we learn about Emerololth dying in the Eureka Zones, but technically her official death was during the events of A Realm Reborn. I understand that there's that whole thing with Gaius von Belsar, but we'll come back to that, trust me. For now, we're going to be moving on to Shadowbringers, which gives us the greatest number of Ascian encounters to this day. The first Ascian to fall was Emmet Selk, who was pierced by many shards of White Auracite to contain his essence before the Warrior of Light dealt a lethal blow to grant him his end. Next was Elidibus, who was not defeated with the use of White Auracite. Instead, his soul was absorbed into the Crystal Tower after his defeat. While not granting him a true death, it did act as a prison from which he could not escape. The third Ascian to perish in Shadowbringers is Metron. After the events of the Eden's Promise raid, Metron is set free from Eden itself. His essence, however, dissolves back into the natural flow on its own, finally granting him his true end. His partner, Logrif, is actually still alive. Despite having suffered from an interesting case of amnesia, Logrif is well aware that she was an Ascian. But she now goes by the name Gaia, and has chosen to dedicate her powers and knowledge to helping Reen and the Warrior of Light. Which brings us to Endwalker. The trapped Elidibus used what remaining power he had within the Crystal Tower to assist the Warrior of Light in traveling back in time to Elpis. This seemingly grants him his true death, although some of the words used to describe what happened to him are obnoxiously vague. But we're going to have to go with the current understanding that this sacrifice gave him his final end. The last Ascian whose fate we're aware of in the story is that of Fandaniel. After being defeated as the last boss in the Aetioscope dungeon, his very soul was dragged by Asahi deeper into the ethereal realm, presumably to experience what we might consider to be hell, as he is granted his true death as well. The never-ending tempest of life and ether that is the core of the star, serving as Fandaniel's final prison. And that is the end of every Ascian we know of within the current lore of Final Fantasy XIV. Knowing the ultimate fate of 9 Ascians isn't bad, and if we dare to include the fact that the Warrior of Light is the reincarnation of Azim, that's 10 out of the original 14 members of the Convocation that we know the current stories of. But who are the 4 remaining Ascians? The names we've not seen are Pashtarat, Halmarut, Ultima, and Dudelaphon. Where they've been and what they've been doing is almost a complete mystery to us, as not much, if any, lore involving them has been revealed ever since A Realm Reborn. One of the only hints we get as to what they've been doing comes from Gaius von Belsar in Stormblood, because after he re-enters the story, he has 2 red masks dangling from his hip. But the problem is, him possessing these only confirms that he found and defeated them in combat. The MSQ never actually gives us a clear explanation as to where, when, and how he fought them, or if he even used a permanent method of slaying. For all we know, the Ascians he defeated used some kind of trick to survive and are technically still around. So, until the MSQ decides to elaborate further on how Gaius found and defeated these Ascians, we have to guess that they're still alive. But for the sake of argument, let's say he did defeat them permanently. Where does that leave us? Well, if he did, there are only 2 Ascians remaining. If he didn't, there are 4 Ascians remaining. Either way, not all the Ascians have been defeated. So, what are they doing? Well, there's actually quite a few directions their story could be headed. Of course, we see an Ascian silently standing before Calyx at the end of patch 7.3. Clearly, they're working together, but that's only one of the multiple Ascians we know still exist. Where are the others? Are they still working toward a common goal? Do they each have a different vision for the future? And where have they been this whole time? All of these are valid questions. So let's start with what we know. At least one Ascian is working alongside Calyx, or possibly using Calyx to forward some kind of plan. After all, the Ascians are more well known for using people than working alongside them. There's even evidence to suggest that Calyx was approached by a black-masked Ascian, and not one of the few red masks that remain. The evidence is in the shoulders. Notice how the cloak covers half the shoulder on the Ascian that approaches Calyx, much like how the black-masked Ascians in A Realm Reborn looked. Those that wore red masks often had much more decorative shoulder pieces that aren't covered up. But even if this is a black-masked Ascian, that still leaves the question, why help Calyx? It's entirely possible that the attempts at interdimensional fusion during Dawntrail's story were simply a new method of trying to rejoin the ninth reflection to the source. With the original Unsundered, Elidibus, Emet-Selch, and Lahabrea now gone, and Zodiark having been destroyed, the original plans on rejoining the reflections have been thrown into absolute chaos. So it only stands to reason that they might be searching for a new method of rejoining if that is their ultimate goal. But why continue the rejoinings? Call it tunnel vision. They had joined the Unsundered in hoping to restore the star to its original power, and perhaps that's all they can see themselves doing. And yet, it's entirely possible that they're manipulating Calyx for another reason entirely. There have actually been plenty of theories surrounding which Ascian has been influencing Alexandria all this time. For example, Pashtarat was once known to preserve order and law, and Alexandria just so happened to create an organization called Preservation. Perhaps a connection, perhaps not. Others have suggested that Dudelaphon must have had tremendous influence here. Having once been known as the patron of invention, Dudelaphon could have been the real driving force behind Alexandria's unnaturally rapid technological advancement. But if their plans aren't to continue the rejoinings, then they may have found a new calling altogether. And speaking of new callings, Ascians like Logarith have proven that not all of them are eager to double down and continue the work of the Unsundered. Now known as Gaia, Logarith is an Ascian that has entirely switched sides. choosing instead to aid the first reflection and help restore it, even though her original orders were to help prepare this reflection for the eventual rejoining. Sure, Gaia may have suffered from amnesia and didn't entirely remember her life as an Ascian with perfect clarity, but even after learning who she was and what she had done, Gaia still chose to side with the Warrior of Light and Reen, dedicating her powers to restoration. In a way, she's resuming her original work as an ancient, dedicating her life to improving and enriching the lives of terrestrial creatures. Gaia proved that not all Ascians need to continue their original plans, and while we see Calyx with one Ascian, it's entirely possible that they aren't all working together. Some might no longer see the point in causing mayhem with the Unsundered and Zodiark gone, kind of like how when Findaniel went immediately off script once the most powerful Ascians were dead. If that's the case, we might see some interpersonal conflict between the remaining Ascians. Some wanting to continue their work in rejoining the shards, or begin a new set of notorious schemes. While others might have had enough with chaos and wish to take care of the world as it is now. Either way, these Ascians have remained complete mysteries for nearly a decade. They could be friends, they could be foes, and they could just be trolling. Maybe they told Calyx to create a primal for the Warrior of Light to kill just for fun, because they knew that the infamous Primal Slayer would turn Necron into cutlets with ease. I have 100 gil that the Warrior of Light will kill Necron in under a minute. No. I helped Calyx make a concept. 500 gil says that they need to slay it more than once. You're both wrong! They're gonna grab the nearest cat girl and throw them at Necron like a furry torpedo! 1,000 gil on cat torpedo! But I digress. With everything I've covered in this video, tell me, what do you expect from the Ascians moving forward? Are they all working together to undermine the Warrior of Light? Are we going to see more Ascians betray the cause like with Gaia? Or do you think some of the Ascians have just refused to pick a side and are trying to live some form of peaceful life somewhere else? Be sure to let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. As for me, I'll be preparing more subjects for us to cover in the coming days. But until that day comes, stay safe, my friends. Thank you all for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. But before I go, I'd like to acknowledge my biggest contributors. A grand thank you to Amina Voltaria, Naray, and Potato. Links to things like my channel Discord, social media, and connections to my channel artist Caddy can be found down in the description below. Thank you all once again for your viewership, and I hope you have a wonderful day.